Hello and welcome. My name is Bronson. I am one of the folks here at Beka Looms in our St. Paul, Minnesota wood shop. Today I'm going to show you how to warp a 20-inch Beka rigid Heddle Loom. First off, I'll be using the word warp both as a noun and as a verb. So don't get confused. The yarn you put on the loom is called warp. The process of putting yarn on the loom is called warping, which is to say I will warp my loom with warp yarn. Got it? Okay. There are a variety of ways of warping any rigid Heddle loom. There isn't one correct way, just different approaches done by different people. The technique I'm going to show you today starts with winding warp on a warping board, then takes advantage of Beka's unique beam teeth to quickly get an evenly spaced warp over your loom. It's one of the most popular weaving techniques. First, following basic warping board instructions, I wound my warp ahead of time. A good warp cross is key to using any warping board. It prevents yarn from getting tangled when you warp your loom. Just make a figure 8 pattern at the top of your warping board to create your warp cross. Before taking the wound warp off your board, be sure to loop some yarn through the warp crosses. You want to make sure the cross is maintained. Now I'm ready to put it on my loom whenever it's convenient. Don't forget about that last little knob to get a little tie on there too. Okay, so now we want to make sure that our loom is assembled correctly. So we got our beam teeth facing up, we got our knobs on here correctly, and the washer should be on the outside of these sides, right next to the knob itself. And the pawls and gears should match up. They should be both on the same side. And the pawls should be facing downwards, kind of pointing downwards like that. And you can engage them and disengage them. Okay, so now we're ready to start setting up the loom for warping. We are going to mark our heddle and our beam teeth. The heddle blocks that are sitting there holding that heddle up in the middle are only used for this process, so we won't be using them any other time in the weaving, just to hold our heddle up like so. And right now we're going to measure and mark where we want to put our warp on to these teeth with a tape measure. So I just measured in 5 inches. You could also count in 25 teeth. There are 5 teeth per inch. Alright, just take a little string, wrap it around. You just want to make sure your project is centered up. And we'll just zoom through this process here. Okay, so now I have just taken my warp off of the warping board, and all I did was stick my thumb and my middle finger in where the pegs are, and I took it off with my left hand because I am right-handed. It's going to be a lot easier to feed it with your left hand and use the crochet hook to catch the string with your right hand, unless you are left-handed. So whatever your dominant hand, use the other hand to take it off the board with. And so it kind of shows you just want to put the string in the slot, use that cross so you don't tangle up your yarns. Just one at a time, put it in each slot, boom. One slot, boom. One slot, boom. And yeah, do this until you're done. And then you kind of link it onto that tooth and back. Okay, so now we're setting up here to wind our warp onto our back, onto our warping beam. So I pushed it off there, and the shed blocks are going to catch on the edge of the table. So it's good to have a square table at least, not a round edge. And now I just want to comb it out and get that warp as uniform as possible. You want a nice uniform tension on there so it comes out nice and neat. Otherwise, if your tension is not even, it will make it a little wonky. So this is important to make sure it's combed out nicely, get a nice even tension. And yeah, now we're ready to start winding it onto our warp beam. And what I've done is I used an old paper grocery bag uh, to put in between the uh, warping beam and the warp thread itself, so it doesn't catch with the teeth, to make a nice even uh, tension. And I just have a friend holding the warp. You can do this yourself with a warping peg, but trust me, it's a lot easier with a friend. And now we're just about to the end here, and we're going to go until it's about a couple inches past the beam, and then we will tie on to the cloth beam. Okay, so now I am ready to start threading my Heddle holes. But first we gotta cut all these ends because they're all just loops. So when I told you to tie on that last little peg, that's where this comes into play. You just find where they're all tied up at the end there. And once you do that, you just kind of stick your finger in there, got it all figured out, cool, and just cut it. Cool. Alright, so now we're ready to start threading those through. And you're gonna do it one by one, and you just go, and I usually start away from me and work towards myself. Pull one out and stick the crochet hook into the heddle hole, since you already have one in the slot. And you just want a little tension on there, because it is a small hook, but with a little tension it hooks right on perfectly. And boom, cool, got it through. Alright, and that's kind of a method. You hold it with your thumb and your or your middle finger and index finger. In a second I kind of show how to make a little loop and do it that way too. It's just kind of a tight space, so you want to be able to work it well. Okay, so this shows that loop. Here's that loop, cool. Put the crochet hook in, you loop it on, make a tension, and then just pull it through. Kind of the same as the other way, but not that much different. Alright, now that it's all threaded through the heddle holes, we're going to make little 1-inch bundles. Essentially, you're just going to count 10 threads, tie them all together in a little overhand knot. I like to use my crochet hook, makes it easier to count, and you don't make any mistakes. You just one by one, tie them together, a little overhand knot. Okay, so now that we got all the bundles tied up, we're going to start tying them on to our cloth beam. And all I've done is just tied a piece of string to the front cloth beam there. And I'm just winding some thread around it. And we're going to go in between what we call the shed. You can see how it opens up like that because you got threads in the holes and you got threads in the slots. So we just go in between there. And we're just going to zigzag in between the bundles of thread to the cloth beam, back to the bundles of thread, back to the cloth beam, and just zigzag back and forth until you have them all tied up there. Okay, now that we got all of them tied up, we are ready to adjust the tension if need so. You can just adjust that zigzagging thread in between the cloth beam and your warp threads for adjustments. You know, you want it to be nice and even. It's pretty important at this step to make sure it is a nice and even tension on all of your warp threads. And once you do that, we are going to wind our warp so it is flush with the cloth beam there, and get rid of those zigzagging threads in our warping area, or our weaving area, sorry. Alright, so I just kind of butt it up against the table using those little notches we make in there. And you can adjust it, use the pawls to hold the tension there. So you can loosen up the knobs, set your pawl, and then tighten them up. There we go. Then you just wind your cloth beam up, and yep, you can use shed blocks also, whatever works best. Alright, little piece of paper, because again, you gotta make sure the teeth don't catch on your project. And you can use little pieces of paper or you can use really long ones. I like to use shorter ones for my cloth beam. It seems to work out a little better, nothing in the way that way too. Alright, so now that we're all lined up, we're ready to weave. Rock and roll. There's an up shed, boom, down shed, boom. You're ready to start weaving. Up shed. Tension's nice and even. Shed blocks are holding it all up. Yeah, and don't worry about those shed blocks. They are glued and they are sturdy. Or the notches, whichever works best for you. It looks like we are ready to start weaving. So thanks for watching, everyone. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to call us. But I hope this video helps. Thanks. Bye.